Hi, this is the Magnificent Midlife podcast, and I'm Rachel Lancaster. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now is our time. The last time me and today's guest got together, we had such a brilliant conversation on her podcast, I just had to share her with you. Clarissa Kristjansson is a mindfulness and menopause expert. She's the author of the Mindful Menopause and the host of the quite brilliant Thriving Thru Menopause podcast. She's on a mission to change the way women approach menopause and aging, bit like me really. We both get quite hot under the collar about a lot of the same issues. We're hopefully going to have a lot of fun on this repeat run. Welcome, Clarissa. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to have a second round conversation with you.
I know, it's fantastic. We really just, I know we riffed off each other last time so much. It's like, oh, we don't like this, and oh, we don't like that. So we might get to that. But first of all, I'm going to start off with asking you, how did you get so passionate about menopause?
You know, I actually was working as a mindfulness practitioner, and I had large numbers of midlife women coming to me with the same issues. I can't sleep. I'm really stressed. My doctor is signing me off sick, saying I'm burnt out. But I don't feel burnt out. And they were just getting diagnosed because here, living in Sweden as I do, cognitive behavioural therapy is the be-all and end-all of everything. And they were being told, you have generalised anxiety disorder, go away. You're not even burnt out. And I recognised in them my own journey of being highly anxious, not being able to sleep. My blood pressure was sky high. And began to join dots, and the dots were, could this be menopause or perimenopause? And of course, that seemed to fit very well. And then I dug deeper and deeper, and it became my passion rather than just an adjunct to the way I was working with clients.
So what have you learnt from your own experience that you then apply to help your clients have a better experience of menopause?
That this is multidisciplinary. That's the first thing I would say, that there is a lot of different factors that play into your menopause experience, and that mental health is incredibly important, I think, and that gets brushed to one side or treated in a very, as I said before, cognitive behavioural therapy, there you are. And really that we need to approach menopause in such a more holistic way in order to help women. And that's how I actually ended up solving my issues. I mean, HRT wasn't even on the agenda in Australia. I mean, that conversation never came in. But acupuncture, meditation, mindfulness, changing my diet, getting a personal trainer were those things that quite quickly put me back on track. And that's when I started to say, well, what if I could work with people in the same way? What if people had a suite of things that they could choose that were right for them, but we also knew were good for them, that could put them on a journey to feeling better and more empowered? Not just, I feel better, but I'm in control. I'm in the driving seat, rather than I have to go to my doctor and either be rebuffed or get handed a tablet and said, there you are, go away, dear.
It's about being proactive, isn't it? I love that, because I think so much of what we think about menopause is that it happens to us and we just have to kind of take the punches and try and suffer through it, rather than, as you say, taking back control and actually being proactive about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have the ability to take control. I mean, obviously we have lots of life stresses. And they are a big contributing factor, and they make us more or less able to take control. I mean, when I was initially perimenopause and my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I had an ex-husband whose business was going down the pan, and that would have been very difficult for me, on top of having 2 horses, 4 cats, a dog and a 7-year-old. Life was just too complicated. But when we can sort through things, then we are able to be back in that driving seat.
And do you think that modern life contributes, the way we live now contributes to how we experience menopause?
Oh, without doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, because we are carrying huge amounts of burdens. We live in a workplace that has been designed around men from the 1950s. We go to work 8 hours a day. We have to be at work at a certain time. Okay, pandemic as an exception, but for the rule, we have a 8:30 to 5:30 work day, which has now bled into our lives because we come home with mountains of emails and Skype calls and heaven knows what that goes on in the evening. We are expected, on top of that, to do all the things that our mothers did. I mean, men only contribute a tiny bit to the running of a household. And I don't mean that they don't do the vacuuming or take out the rubbish. Of course they do. But they don't wake up thinking, I wonder if our car insurance is done and have the kids been to the dentist. And it's this cognitive overload and a social pressure to look and be a certain way, which is out of sync as we age, that creates the huge issues we have as women in this time of life in particular.
Wow. Yeah, just totally. That makes complete sense. So how do you use mindfulness particularly to help women?
Well, I think first of all, mindfulness is about being aware. That's its first thing. Am I aware of where I am, what's going on in my body, my own energy capacity, and my thoughts? I mean, our thoughts are our biggest enemy, really, and mindfulness starts there. It starts by being able to make small steps to 5 minutes of calm, checking in with myself. And I also think that if we're mindful, we start to think about, what am I eating? How am I sleeping? Am I moving? And tracking your menopause symptoms is also part of being mindful. It's not just I'm doing it, but it's a part of that generalized awareness. And we always have to start with being rather than doing. And we don't have to meditate, but it helps, is what I would say. It's hard, and it's very hard if you're very stressed. Let me just be open to your listeners that, it's often said, oh, you just need to do this. Well, your mind is buzzing and you're probably thinking about pugs and what's on your shopping list and other things that aren't relevant. But you begin to create that process, is to be aware. But mindfulness is also about acceptance. And I think a lot of us are struggling with accepting that we're changing, and changing in ways that are contrary to the social narrative, which is all about being young and youth is praised, and being old means you're going to be, put out to pasture, quite frankly. Even though that's changing a little bit today, that is still a big step for women. So mindfulness and acceptance, awareness and acceptance are the bedrock. But then mindfulness is also the basis of compassion. So if you look at the compassion models from people like Professor Paul Gilbert, who are really leaders in the way we think about becoming a compassionate self, mindfulness gives you the bedrock to then act compassionately towards yourself, which is not about just being nice. It's about having strength to take action and to have strong intentions to change your life around, starting with your inner conversation.
Yeah, that's so powerful, because so much of, you've touched on it already, and we talked about it when we spoke before, so much of society is telling us that we lose our value, that we become less relevant. And I think so many women, they start hating themselves, don't they? Because we're not taught to embrace the change, as you say. We're taught that this is something wrong. And actually we talked about how that narrative seems to be getting stronger, and you and me, we're out there banging our drums, aren't we? Because we don't want that to happen.
No, and I think what we're getting is quite polarised images. The image of perimenopause, which I think our friend Angela from Behind the Woman was very much sort of talking about this week on social media, was, that every time we now talk about perimenopause, there's pills or blood tests sewn up and we looking like we're about to die. In the images, a terrible image that I'm about to share on social that came out in a Swedish newspaper. And this woman, she looks like she's lost a relative or something really tragic has happened in her life. And then there's a blood test next to her, a blood vial. And you're thinking, that is the image that goes out on social media of us being disempowered, unwell, unable to advocate for ourselves. And then on the other side, we've got all these really bright, sparkly, wonderful older women, but where's the bridge between the two?
Yes. Where's the bloody bridge? Yeah. So what can we do about that? I share your frustration. It's not based in reality, is it? It's just not true. We touched on this about some of the myths, didn't we? Some of the things that are out there. So what are some of your favourite myths about menopause that you really want to change and get people to wake up about?
Well, the first thing is that it's not every woman that's going to have the journey from hell. There are 20% of women who will have a very difficult time for a variety of reasons. And they can be genetic or epigenetic, they can be environmental, they can also be to do with lifestyle. If you've had a history of abuse, and that anybody can fall into that space, or you've had a long history of anxiety and depression for a variety of reasons, then you are predisposed, because that's toxic stress. And when our hormones change, that changes. But there's 80% of women whose lived experience is different to that. There can be phases when it's difficult. There can be some women who say, oh, did that happen to me? Quite frankly. And I think we have to bring those stories to light as well. And allow stories of actually going through this and changing our lives fundamentally. That transformative journey that you and I, Rachel, and many women that we know have also gone through, where they've battled their issues, but come out stronger and better and more powerful. And those are the sort of stories I think need to come out more and more, rather than just trying to counterpoint the kind of HRT, I'm disempowered person, to these people changed their life. It didn't mean they had an easy time, but there were ways through it.
Yeah. But it does sometimes, it feels like an uphill battle, doesn't it? Because so much of the narrative now is take the pill. Because I think we all want a panacea, don't we? A lot of people want a panacea. They're not willing to do the work, and they think that this is something wrong, therefore it needs to be fixed. Therefore, to fix something, health, you take a pill. And that's what's not right, because we don't take pills to go through puberty, do we?
No, but we are putting 14-year-old girls on the pill. So I think women are a generation who've never had and normal is not a word I use, but have had a period that actually looks like the period someone like I would have had as a 14-year-old girl. So I think we are medicalizing whole swathes of women's lives and not allowing them to unfold, because as soon as there's an issue, then there's a medical intervention. And it's not to say that that is not necessary for some people, but that becomes the norm. And that means that we are out of touch with our own bodies and how they behave. And I think that's when perimenopause can become quite a shock, because your body then does what it's supposed to do. But we're also not elevating the great understanding that's coming out of neuroscience and clinical psychiatry of just how powerful we become post-menopause. And I interviewed the other day, and for release soon, Dr. Luann Brizendine, who you may know is a New York Times bestselling, and she's brought out a new book called all about the brain literally becoming amazing post-menopause. Now, that's the sort of story.
Really?
Oh, yeah,
Oh.
absolutely fascinating about how much our brain recovers from this brain fog and these issues, and we become stronger, more creative, more able to focus than we've ever been in our lives. We need much more of that. Along with the great work of people like Dr. Lisa Mosconi, to take the front and center stage, rather than you need to be medicated for the end of your life because basically you are now at fault. You're faulty.
Yeah, you've got a deficiency. I can't bear that. I really can't bear that.
I hate that word. I hate the words like diagnosis, deficiency. They say that you're incapable, you're not good enough. And we already, as women, think we're not good enough because we receive that message from quite early on that we're not good enough. So then you have that reinforced that somehow you going through this means that you are faulty. And I hate that. I really, really do.
And then there is also the narrative, isn't there? We talked about this on your podcast, that there's the argument that we used to die 5 minutes after menopause in the past.
No,
Therefore, we didn't need to have all of these things to help us. But you've done your research and I've done my research, and we know that's a load of claptrap.
Oh, it's total BS, Rachel. I mean, for a start, I could just draw on my own family. My father had 2 maiden aunts who lived to be 95 or something. My father's godmother, and I think she was a cousin of she was 102. She emigrated to Canada when she was 91. She could walk faster than you and I up the hill at 85, honestly. And my own grandmother lived to be 100. My mother's 2 mother and father were 92 and 93 respectively. So I have in my family so many.
Stock.
I've got good stock. I'm around for another 30 years. There's no stopping me. But these women lived in an age where there was no medication. I think my grandmother told a funny story about a friend of hers who had very, obviously what today we would know as vaginal atrophy and areas of irritation. And the doctor told her she hadn't had enough children and that's why she had this. And she'd had 8.
Oh, good grief.
So it's not a new story to be rebuffed and told there's something wrong with you. But I have in my own family so many examples of women who have lived way, way past menopause, and they were fit, they ran businesses, they looked after relatives, and they were sharp until they were really quite old.
Well, I think only this week I read that, digging for half an hour a week can stave off Alzheimer's. It's a great headline, isn't it? But people had to do things, didn't they? I mean, my mum, she's 87 now. She won't sit down. Even at the weekend, she feels guilty about sitting down before 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And she's still doing all of her own laundry and she irons all her sheets. I haven't ironed in years. But I think... And she has gardened by herself up until the last 2 years where she's finally got a gardener. But guess what? She goes out and gardens with the gardener now. So she's actually, while she's not doing exercise, she's always active. She's always doing things. And I think that's part of it as well, that now we live such a sedentary life, don't we? It's a highly stressed, very sedentary life for a lot of us. And I think all of that has an impact, doesn't it?
Oh, I think without doubt we know that movement is huge. And we're not talking about formalized exercise here. It's about movement. It's a mindset that is about being up and being active, going out for that walk, because walk isn't really the same as exercise, but it's about working in our gardens. It's about getting up and doing things. But we are part of a generation now who watch TV and sit still. We sit at work all day, then we sit when we get home. And so any exercise we do in the middle is kind of, well, by the by, I would say really in some ways, it probably makes very little difference.
But it's so easy to just say, this is what happens and therefore we need help with it, rather than thinking about why this is happening. I know toxicity is another thing that you're interested in, isn't it? And how that impacts our experience. It was interesting when you were talking about 14-year-olds being put on the pill. So I went on the pill at 17, and I was on it for a long time. And we still don't know what the impact of that is on women's menopause experience now, do we? I mean, I'm sure that having had all of those synthetic hormones in my body for so long probably contributed to me getting that early menopause diagnosis at 41.
What we do know from the work Lisa Mosconi has done is that women who have been on the pill or have had multiple pregnancies, which of course would have been our grandparents and our great-grandparents, is that they build up estrogen reserves in the body, which can be incredibly helpful for the Alzheimer dementia angle later in life. And her research is indicating that. So there may be some plus benefits, but I don't think we've ever looked at the impact of that in a perimenopause context because we don't bother to fund the research for that.
I know. It's very easy for drug companies to fund research into their own drugs, isn't it? But everybody then poo-poos all the other stuff. Well, some people do. The medical people poo-poo the other stuff and say it's not research-based. Because nobody's gonna research. In fact, they did though, haven't they? They've researched the impact of soy recently,
Yes.
and that can be very, very helpful. And I was like, oh my goodness, thank goodness somebody has finally researched that. Oh, we like dogs.
I don't know what she's heard. She's being a bit roughy today. She said, "Nay." She's very rude.
Right. We're very welcoming to pets and washing machines and random postman calling at the door.
She's been quite up because today is the day that Dad works away. He works away Tuesdays and sometimes Wednesdays, and of course she's only in love with him. So that becomes part of this roughy, buffy, over hyper. She's a little hyper female. except she doesn't go through menopause because she doesn't have any ovaries anyway. She went through it early.
Yeah, you'd think she'd be a bit more chilled out, wouldn't you?
No. But we were talking about that research and actually saying, that the research, unless it's done by particular people, doesn't get traction either. And that I think is very dangerous. But I think soy is an interesting case because it is certainly linked to a very strong Asian culture originally, and they have a very different attitude as well towards menopause. But we were talking about toxicity, and we don't know the extent of endocrine disruptors in the environment. We know they exist. But again, for many of us, we are, in fact, probably the first generation to live with this level of toxicity in our total environment. We certainly know that many approved ingredients in personal care and in our household cleaners, and particularly in the US, less so in Europe because we're a bit more stringent with EU law, are known disruptors or xenoestrogens. So they mimic estrogen in the body. And they are allowed, and of course the skin is the biggest absorber of these. Not surprisingly, that's why modern HRT is skin-based, because it absorbs very well and is less invasive than taking it internally. But we then would extrapolate that and say, well, these things are also coming into my skin and having an impact. And we don't know really how much or how important they are in changing the perimenopausal experience that we have. But they are there, and we need to be aware and take measures as much as we are able to change that.
And as you said, it's that overall toxic load, isn't it? So depending on where you live, you might be more vulnerable to something than somebody else. So, I've always lived in highly polluted areas, and I live in almost central London now, very close to the centre anyway. So there's a lot of air pollution in my environment. And therefore, I might be more sensitive to other levels of toxin because I've already got that high level of toxicity just in my air.
Yeah, we don't know the full extent of that. And again, we're not looking that closely. So it's very popular at the moment to poo-poo the agency in the US that does a lot of the environmental toxicity and try and play them down because they are challenging food companies and other FMCG companies who have a lot of money.
And is that the EWC?
Yeah, the EWC.
Or EWG, isn't it?
EWG. And they do some really good reports. But I have seen influencers who have their own agenda trying to discredit a group that have been around for quite a long time and who produce some very valuable reports that we should be looking at and at least questioning. It's not saying we believe one or the other, but we should be questioning and saying, would it be good for me to maybe cut down on perfumed products or products that contain this particular ingredient? We can make a choice. But at least we're doing that from an aware perspective. So it's good to read and to understand as much as we can of the valid science.
I know. I quoted EWG in my book because they produce these lists of the vegetables that have a high level of pesticides in them and that don't. And there's a UK equivalent, and the name of that escapes me, but I'll try and put it in the show notes. But they have a list so that you literally know what kind of fruit and veg you might want to try and get organic, because they have a high level of pesticides on them, and then the others that you don't need to worry about so much. So from that perspective, I think it's incredibly valuable work that they're doing.
I agree, and I think knowing that those things can affect your gut microbiome and knowing what we know about the gut microbiome and its role in estrogen and the body's ability to process estrogen now, that becomes even more important.
And we've talked about, if you just mask it with HRT, you don't get a chance to explore what's actually going on, do you? You're not curious. You just want to fix.
Well, you fix the symptoms, or you think you do, because if we were to talk broadly with women, I think we would find that many women have a more complex journey with HRT than is the popular narrative. Many women have to keep adjusting the dose, which of course we do. Many women, it's not a set, take and set and forget. It is a constant process. And if you're taking it through the skin, you absorb things differently to me because your skin is different. And if your skin is changing, that can be different. So it is a continual journey. And for some people, it helps with certain symptoms, but not with others. So it isn't a set and forget approach at all. And we do recognize that what you eat, how you move, how you sleep, how you manage stress are important factors. And I was talking to somebody who had a very difficult perimenopause. And she said, well, I suppose it would have been easier for me if I hadn't been neurodivergent, drank a bottle of wine a night and been a single mum struggling. She said, I'm quite sure I would have had a different experience. But that would just be, well, HRT's fixed you now. And of course it didn't for that person. That person had to make big lifestyle changes in order to, and have other medical support in order for her perimenopause symptoms to become more under her own control.
And what did you do before you got involved in menopause?
Well, I spent 30 years in corporate life. I was a senior manager in some of the world's biggest organizations, and I headed up consumer insights. So I look at data all day.
So you know what you're talking about.
Well, I tend to look at the numbers and ask a question. So when I see figures thrown out or statements thrown out, I want to see the qualification behind those. I want to know how did you, or what do those numbers really mean? And the good one for me is always this menopause at work conversation. We chuck out a large number without qualifying it. 1 million women have lost or left their roles.
That drives me nuts.
Oh, no. You're there, Rach.
I'm there. I'm like, whoa.
But 1 million women may. But over what timescale?
Yeah.
Over what timescale?
And how did you come up with that figure?
Well, how was
Where
that?
did it come from? Where's the research done? What's the audience?
Yeah, and even if 1 million women have in their 50s or early 50s to mid 50s left work, if you did that over 15 years or 10 years, which I presume is possibly how you would calculate that data, how would that compare to men leaving their role over that timescale? How would that compare to the number of people who left or changed jobs? And it doesn't say, because the immediate counter, you don't care about menopause at work. I care about menopause at work as part of treating humans properly altogether, but it's not qualified. And we don't know who they are. Did you ask them if menopause was their reason for leaving in the exit interview? Or did you ask them retrospectively within a context where menopause is a heightened conversation? Because you will have a different answer.
Exactly. Oh, exactly. And it's not objective, is it? It's research that's done to prove a theory.
Yeah, research is always done to prove a theory, but
it's yes, I suppose so. All right then, but it's not objective. It's not an agenda, perhaps an agenda rather than a theory.
Yeah,
that there's an agenda there, and we're looking for the data to support the agenda, rather than being objective about what the real situation is. And I've looked into this, and it's, the U-curve of happiness works for both men and women, and our unhappiest age is 47, just because it's our unhappiest age, and it will pick up after that. There's also the fact that it's a big birthday, and women especially, and men, we get very paranoid around big birthdays, and 50 is like the whopping big birthday, because you can't pretend that you're not halfway through life. At 50, you can't pretend you've got more years left, unless you're planning to definitely live over 100. And the sandwich generation, it's when ageism kicks in, because we start losing our hair colour, we start getting wrinkles, ageism impacts us, we start to lack confidence, imposter syndrome peak is around menopause. So sorry, I know I'm supposed to be interviewing you and not getting on my soapbox, but there's so many other issues, aren't there?
Look, it's complicated. I mean, all these things are happening at the same time as our bodies are changing. And I think there are people there who want a particular story which feeds their own view of the world. And we all do that. I mean, that's part of doing research and having hypotheses and theories. But when it becomes such a skewed agenda, and you start putting out data in ways that people who aren't data savvy don't understand what it means. So we get a number like 59% of women leaving work. 59% of what percent of what? Oh, it's about 5%. That's not good. No one says that we should have to feel we should leave, but there can be lots, and we don't look at all the mitigating circumstances, who these women were, whether they were in a financial position to leave. We throw up dramatic numbers that maybe people who are not used to looking at numbers in ways, and if that's not your job, then you're not used to it, take on face value and build into a story. And that is my objection to this. I think that menopause at work is important only if we can actually behave like human beings at work, which is more my context of it. I belong to a group, and they're called effing business. And there are a bunch of business people who work as consultants and business psychologists, and that comes up, menopause comes up in that conversation. It's like, well, if we treated people like human beings at work, then a lot of those issues wouldn't actually occur. They just wouldn't, because we wouldn't speak to people the way we speak to them. We wouldn't marginalise women. We would address the unconscious bias of the sexism, ageism intersection. And we would actually promote people who were good, compassionate, empathetic humans over people who are technically competent or a friend of the chairman into positions of power.
Are you running for president?
Not yet. but maybe I should. But that's my stance around a lot of this, is that it's to single out. It's like when mindfulness at work was all the rage. We don't talk about that anymore. That's kind of out the window now. And we have these constant kind of campaigns. And having worked in business for 30 years, I know how it works. HR managers have KPIs. They get some sort of learning or training target within that, as do certain senior business leaders. And so that's what we do. So we're going to hit these KPIs. So let's have a menopause at work training. Let's get an award. Let's change some policies. And then we'll run around with that. And something new's come along, so we'll do that over here. And it becomes like the Are You OK Day in Australia, where once a year we eat, cupcakes and care about mental health. Well, I worked in an organisation where 3 people had committed suicide at work, and they had Are You OK Day, cupcake days. I mean, it was just stomach churning, quite frankly. And we're in danger of doing that. We're in danger of doing that and having, World Menopause Day, where we all have this lovely day and we're all happy clapping, we've talked and we've won our award. But fundamentally, we haven't actually changed the way in which we treat women through their whole time at work as a cohort who may need different levels. And we haven't treated people with the need that they are human beings and they bring them whole selves to work.
And there's the added sort of complication with menopause. It's not like maternity leave with 9, or pregnancies. You've got 9 months of pregnancy and then you've got a fixed time of maternity leave. Perimenopause could go on for 7, 8, 9 years. What are you going to do? How are you going to manage that within the workplace? It's very complicated, isn't it?
It is much more complicated than running a training course and teaching managers and having some policies in place. The world hasn't achieved maternity leave yet. That's the European Union. Australia is still discussing it, and the US, where you get sick pay and you're off for a few weeks. So, and we haven't really been able as a society to deal with parental leave. Children get sick. Things happen, and Sweden's sort of halfway there. You can have time off for your kids, but only a limited time, etc. But it is not addressed. So then we're asking us to take a more complicated issue that can come and go and in for women over a long period, up to 10 years or more. And workplaces are not structured. As I said, they're structured on a 9 to 5, 8:30 to 5:30 male model. And so really to change things fundamentally, that's what needs to change. Not the approach of we've run a training course, we've got an award, there are some policies in place. That's going to make long-term limited impact. And the return on the investment is never calculated. Calculating how many women resign is not calculating your return on investment.
Wow.
Yeah, but they don't like that.
Powerful,
people don't like that conversation because it challenges. A lot of people are making a lot of money in this space right now.
Oh yes,
and they're challenging their businesses and their livelihood, and asking uncomfortable questions. Which, if I was a CEO, I'd be asking. If I do this, what will be my return on investment? If I do this, how many more women will we retain in the workforce? If I do this, what are my recruitment costs going to look like? Those are the sort of questions a CEO asks. At the end of the day, sadly, they're responsible to their shareholders and to the board, and they want to be seen to be doing the right thing, but they also are very, very, very challenging people, and the P&L sheet rules most businesses. I hate to tell you that. You can be as emotive about menopause at work as you like, but that's the way they function, and that's not wrong. That's how business makes profit and how it pays. Now, that there can be lots of issues with businesses being vile, but that's how business runs today.
I think it's very good that we're at least having the menopause conversations in the workplace. But as you say, you can't just wave the menopause flag and tick the box, can you? And that's, I think, that is, you're right. That's what people are trying to do, is let's tick the menopause box. Whereas actually, it's as we started this conversation talking about, it's a holistic approach. It's looking at everything. And as you said, sexism and ageism is at the root of so much of this, because we fear menopause. We think it's bad because of ageism, because of misogyny, because of the patriarchy. So it's all linked, and we've got to be talking about all of this, not just ticking the menopause box.
Well, exactly. Those are the things that we need to be doing, is changing patriarchal structures. And that doesn't necessarily even mean misogyny, because women themselves can be part of that patriarchy. And there's a lot of really good research that shows that women that get into senior leadership positions don't necessarily champion other women. They often
pull the ladder up
behind them. Well, they adopt patriarchal ways of behaving in order to progress and to survive. And so it's structural change in how we want our organizations to run, and that there is no quick solution. This is probably why I'm in this kind of a group that talks more broadly about how we change things at a structural level, and why communication and the right development of the right leadership skills become much more important than whether you've had somebody in to talk about menopause. Not that that is wrong. It's not like either or. It's we need to have things in place. We need to have those conversations and raise the awareness and have EAP, employee, advice assistance programs for people that need it, and be able in time to build in the right structures for women to work flexibly, or men to work flexibly. I mean, you might be a husband who's supporting a partner who's very unwell in their perimenopause. So it isn't even as gender nuanced as it could be, or if you're transgender. Those are the sort of things we need to be able to embrace in a workforce, and we're not there yet. We're nowhere near at this moment in time.
I think it's interesting that both you and I, we left corporate. We both worked in pretty intense international environments, and we both left. And I left because it didn't work for me. It didn't work for my life. And it was really interesting that the early menopause diagnosis, it kicked in almost immediately after I left corporate, because it was like my body went on holiday and I got sick. It's like, okay, I can't do it anymore. But we have to make work for women, don't we? And we have to make work for older women, because we are losing brilliant women like you and me, for example, because work doesn't work for us.
Absolutely. We are losing a lot of talent to women. Yeah, like you and I, Rich, we leave and then we say, I'm done with this. And I think some of that is the system, and some of it is the change in our brains, because we become much less caring and much less nurturing and much less willing, and we speak out. And so that doesn't fit. And we start saying, well, these are ridiculous rules. These are ridiculous KPIs. I have sat in so many meetings. People will be horrified listening to this, in that you look at your people and you say, well, this person's done a really good job. And they say, we've got a bell curve for the pay rise this year. So we're going to have an X% pay rise, but you've got to put everybody in the middle of the bell curve. So even if you're really, really good, the chance that you're going to get either a poor or a high is nil, because we're squeezing everybody. I mean, systems like that do nothing to help. So after a while, you're sick of it. This is ridiculous. People are not getting rewarded for their hard work. There are the most ridiculous rules. I mean, take even one like you can't post anything on LinkedIn unless, they approve it. So you're supposed to have no personal opinions. And if you speak up, you'll find that somewhere down the line, maybe you get some kind of minor punishment. We're tired of being talked over in meetings. We're tired of you speaking and then some child by this stage who's about 20 but happens to be the right gender repeats what you said, and the most senior person in the room hears it, and we are over this, so we say I'm done with it and we leave. We lose role models for younger women, and we lose talent in the workplace. We go off and set up things and sometimes go on to do wonderful things in our lives, but it's systemic ageism, sexism intersection, and not the inability, but just the unwillingness of the sort of patriarchal structures to actually see that.
It's a very big work in progress, isn't it? We've got a lot of work to do. And I don't want menopause to be the distraction. That's what I also fear. That, we go back to the box ticking, don't we? We've done that. Whereas actually, no, we need to look much more deeply at what's going on.
I think so. And I think that ticking the box on the menopause part is sometimes the easy part. It's not hard to run a training session, to have an information session, or even a workshop to begin the conversation. But if we're not wedded and committed to real systemic change, then it becomes just a session. And I think there's a lot of that going on in the UK. I mean, the conversation is nowhere in the rest of the world, let's be honest. It isn't really there. There might be a well-being session where we talk about menopause symptoms, but it's not enough. I mean, it's not wrong, but it's also not systemic change. And no one at this moment in time can say that what they're doing is systemic cultural change. And it really is, therefore, that maybe menopause at work should be more about cultural change at work, and people who are very much more engaged in that kind of work should see how they can embrace menopause with the help of people who know about it, rather than it being sort of hived off as a separate entity.
And as we started this saying, it's not one or the other. It's and we appreciate what's being done, and it's a great start, but there is so much more that can be done. And I think if we're leading the way in the world, which we clearly are, thanks to the efforts of some really, forward-thinking women, then we can lead the way to completely change the world rather than just the menopause.
I think so. I think when we see this as being part of a bigger whole, then I think we start to see how we can change this. And I think it's really important that men get involved in this menopause at work. There are some, but I think it's really important that this isn't seen as women coming in and giving conversation and leaving. I think it needs to be more gender diverse, more diverse in terms of the totality. It has to be able to embrace the LGBTQIA. It has to embrace cisgendered men, cisgendered women. So we have to have it from a gender perspective. A much broader conversation has to be multiracial, because if we don't have that total conversation, then we're only having part of a conversation.
So what are your how best can we thrive through menopause? What are your top tips?
My top tips, number one, would be to actually look at the things that you can do and change yourself. As a human being, we have choice and ability to change. So it's really good for people to think about, what could I do in terms of my diet, my exercise, where am I, and what could I change? I think it's good to have a kind of a mental plan around your menopause. How would I like to go through this time? What's my vision of my wellness? Where would I like to be? What do I want? What do I want to be different? How do I want to age? Because I think if we don't have any visions of where we're going, we're then at the whims of all the social media, positive and negative. So I think it begins with ourselves. But I would say on top of that, it's really important to communicate. And we have to learn as women to communicate better our needs and our wants in this space. so that we are beginning to open dialogue rather than my manager or my doctor talks to me. I begin to say, this is me and I need this, this and this. And that's very hard for women to do because we're not good at asking for what we need, but we need to have those conversations. And then finally, I think elevating menopause at work, but as a wider perspective of how we treat people better in the workplace. And I think that has to be that different types of groups who are committed to this need to come together and see that each part is part of improving the workspaces, because they're not working for anybody right now. There's, apart from a few top-end CEOs who get massive bonuses, most workplaces are not working for people. So menopause at work is part of that wider dialogue, and rather than hiving off and going down avenues, we need to come together and see how we can change it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife, Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.